We are here in Ardent Studio A. Mark, why don't you start us off with some of the history around the Studio A?
So Studio A is one of the original two studios here at Ardent at the Madison Avenue location, which opened up in 1971. This room has gone through a few revisions throughout its time, actually kind of depending on the era of sound, as I like to call it. The room originally had carpeted floors, and we changed that in early to mid 80s. They got changed to wood floors, and then Tom Dowd came here in like 1989, 90. He and John Fry already had a previous friendship, so he actually helped with some of the design of the original parts of this room. If I'm not mistaken, this is probably one of the last of the Tom Dowd aided designed rooms. It's kind of served its purpose over the years in creating a lot of records, everything from R.E.M. to the Staple Singers to some of the Stevie Ray Vaughan stuff was done in here, and Joe Cocker, Huey Lewis and the News. The Bar-Kays lived in this room for years making records. It's just such an iconic room that is on so many records. Everybody seems to like the sound of it quite a bit.
How different is what we're seeing today from what Tom Dowd would have implemented?
When we dealt with the live rooms here, it's kind of like being a doctor, do no harm. So we didn't change anything per se. So the room itself is still kept all intact. We had to put up a secondary false ceiling above this ceiling to get rid of some of FedEx's flight path, because when this place was originally built, FedEx didn't exist. You know, the vocal booths got changed around because they needed an upgrade, but as far as it changing from when Tom was here, no, it's still the same room and it still sounds the same. And I really talked to some of the older engineers that are still alive that worked here, and I made sure that I had their blessing that it sounded exactly the same, and it does.
You have such a beautiful control room, and I know you've put a crazy amount of work into it. What state did you receive it in, and what was the process like to get what we're looking at today?
Oh man, it's kind of like, just like a Freddy Krueger nightmare when I first got it. It was, ripped up, and there was stuff on the walls, and you didn't really want to like go in there. Also had that nice, 1980s, 1990s self-deprecating gray on the walls. And people had kind of band-aided it over the years. I mean, the installation was just wrong in so many ways. And a lot of the engineers here said that that room had become a problem as far as what it sounded like sonically, that it just wasn't an even sounding control room anymore. We had to do some changes to really make it what it should be now. And there are some aesthetics that they were from a different era and a different time. I mean, I know some people still do, and that's fine. There's different, philosophies and theories, but, I don't believe in using soffit-mounted monitors because it marries you to a room. If something new comes out, or if they do an update on a speaker, or you're not happy with your speakers, then you have to take the room down and you have to change the soffits, and you have to do a lot of work, and I just didn't want that to happen. So, we changed everything over to the B&Ws, and that just is a way better choice in many respects. Plus, monitoring's just changed over the years, so you don't need big speaker to make big sound. A lot of speakers are so much smaller, they're just more, efficient. I mean, there was stuff in there where it was just so destroyed, and it was all thermal. So we corrected all of that, and there was a lot of acoustical changes. But, you're beholden to brick and mortar. You can't, there's no 2x4 studs that you can just knock this down and do that. I mean, you have to play within the box that you're given. So, we did that. And it makes the room sound really, really accurate. I've had no complaints out of that room. If anything, everybody says that it's pretty much like a mastering room as far as it being accurate. So it's a pretty good damn room at the end of the day.
The centerpiece is obviously the beautiful Neve 88R. What led you to that decision? I know you've been a Neve guy for as long as I've known you, but how did we get to the 88R?
We were originally going to refurbish the VR, but then when the studios all started getting refurbished and redone, I knew to really bring the place up to being a world-class facility again, we needed to have something that could be competitive against other studios in this class. And I ran across this note that was sent, and it was handwritten from AMS Neve to John Fry, asking him to come check out the new 88 RS console at AES. Whatever happened, that, purchase never came to fruition at the time. But in the back of my mind, I said, well, that room should probably have an 88R in it. And after much thought and knowing who our competitors were, I made the decision that we were going to buy one. So we did. And it's probably the best choice that I've made as far as a console goes for this room. It just suits the room. It has enough channels. This room is big enough to do a small orchestra and everything else in it, and you need a lot of inputs. And that console has a lot of routing flexibility and everything. Plus, it's a great mixing console too. I mean, it really bridged the gap between what Neve was known for and the sonics of some of its legacy products. The mic preamps in that thing are amazing. I don't think I've ever seen anybody plug in an external mic pre in that room yet. They just pretty much listen to it and go like, these are all great. I know that the equalizer harkens itself back to a much earlier design of an equalizer that Robin improved upon. And he and I talked about it one day. And I kind of took a guess and kind of had a chuckle. And so I kind of know where that equalizer design kind of comes from. And it's one of my favorites, but it's from a series of desks that wasn't quite as well known. It's just a great desk all around, and it doesn't really require a lot of maintenance. I mean, it truly doesn't. The new design of it really, it's just much more stable than the older ones were. It doesn't bake you, and it doesn't bake itself. I mean, the old ones ran really, really hot. The V's and the VRs and everything, those things were just out of control. That thing really isn't. And with the newer power supply design too, it doesn't consume nearly the current that the old ones did as well. But we had to have a Neve in that room because we wanted to be able to attract the type of clients that, we want to have here. And that console has just been so synonymous with great records over the past, decade or two. I also made sure that I contacted Neve and made sure that, are you guys going to mothball this in a couple years? Are you guys going to stop making these? And the answer was no. So that's why we went forward with it, because I didn't want to buy a desk that was then going to become obsolete in a couple of years. There was some stability and just like, all right, this is going to happen, so they're going to keep making these, so I'm not worried about it. But it's a great desk all around, man. And the dynamics on it were a vast improvement over the last dynamics. They do the hard knee limiting like SSLs do. It does it really, really well. So if somebody isn't familiar with a Neve, they can sit behind that and go, oh, okay, but do the dynamics, and it's like as soon as you turn them on and you put it in hard knee, they're like, oh, this does the same exact thing. And it's like, it has a multiple amount of stereo buses on it, so you can do a whole bunch of different stems at once. You can also split the desk down the center, so you can have the left side doing part of a mix, you can have the right side doing part of a mix, and the actual stereo summing from those sections don't actually have to join until you join them back in the center. The routing is kind of like, you can just about do anything on that desk. I mean, it has routing that I've never seen before. I think the only desk that ever did routing that comprehensive was an SSL 9K.
For our viewers who might not know, why is routing so important in a studio like this?
You have a lot of things going on at once. You could have anywhere from 24 to 56 microphone inputs going at once. And you need to be able to get stuff everywhere that you need it to go, and easily, just with the hit of a button. You don't want to have somebody be at the patch bay 24/7 being like, oh, we have to patch this mic pre to this and this to this. You just have to be able to hit it and go. That's something that's lost on some newer desk designs, is the multi-track routing. A lot of companies have dropped it because of what the DAW does. But when you're really trying to do work and you're trying to have flexibility and extra inputs and everything else as far as an inline design goes, man, that's really, really, really important, because, you technically have two things going on at once. You got what you're sending to the DAW or tape, and then you have what's coming back. And then you have AUXes. Then you have what people want to hear in the headphones, and you might have different reverbs or this or that. Or they want to hear these trash mics that are doing this or that, so they feel like the music's coming through the correct way in their headphones. Without that routing, it makes a session really difficult. And it really just kind of takes away from the creative process. What a big desk like that does is it actually enhances the creative process because you don't have to think that much. You don't have to think about cobbling together a signal path or this or that, or, hey, we need an extra mic pre. Well, we're out of 500 series mic pre's today. And it's like, that thing, you just plug another mic into it. And it's like, there you go. There's 72 of them. And also, some guys, and I'm guilty of this as well, as, I like to combine a lot of stuff going down. I don't want to deal with things later. So the multi-track routing really helps. In addition, for, printing stems for, whether it be for recalls, whether it be for Atmos later, if somebody wants to take part of their stereo mix and turn it into an Atmos mix, that desk allows you to do it. So you can run a standard stereo mix with your stereo bus processing on it. In addition, you can also be running multiple stems of what you're doing at the same time. So you don't have to run those passes, 5, 10, 15, however many different stems you want to run. It cuts the time down because, time is money and people want to, get things going very quickly. So that's why it's important.
You mentioned trying to keep the artists being as creative as possible. What other quality of life improvements have you done in the studio to maintain they can do what they do and stay creative?
So, first and foremost is you want to make sure that even the lounges are, nice and kind of posh. So people go in there and they don't feel like they're going into like, oh, here's the closet that we're going to throw you into, is known as our lounge. The lounges are actually very nice here. They're all done up. You have TVs, Macintosh stereos, snacks and fridges and everything else. There's outdoor lounges for both Studio A and C. So there's indoor and outdoor lounges. So they're both private. We redid the atrium here, which is awesome. The other thing too is that we made sure that we have a pretty comprehensive backline as well. So if somebody wants a synth, or if they want, amplifier, if they want this, or if they want that, we have everything set up in such a way that you can ask for it and we probably have it. So there's no, well, I wish we had one of those. It's like, well, just go in the back and grab one. I don't want anybody to not want anything. The other more important thing is that, from working on records over the years, is that certain artists get red light syndrome. They don't perform well while people are looking at them constantly. So that's why we built Studio D, because Studio D is really meant for either editing, or if an artist, say, has a part or something that they want to do, but they're kind of either too shy or embarrassed or something. They're like, well, I want to show this, but I don't want to break up the session. They can go in there, they can cut vocals, they can cut their part, they can do whatever they want to do. And we can get them up and running in like maybe 5 or 10 minutes. And it doesn't stop the workflow of what's happening in one of the larger rooms that's already booked out for them. Because a lot of singers don't like to sing in front of people. Chris Cornell did not like to sing in front of people in the studio. He punched all of his own vocals. He used to sit in the control room and do it. That's kind of an important thing. If somebody, you're trying to get the best performance out of somebody. If somebody, says that like, we want to cut vocals in the hall because the singer really likes it out there. Well, great. Well, we'll just close the doors, block this off, and you can cut vocals in the hall. I don't really care. Whatever's going to get the best performance out of somebody is pretty much our philosophy. I want to make sure that everybody feels comfortable and great. And, we have an awesome staff as far as whatever you need. There's somebody here pretty much 24/7 that can, if you need a hotel booked, if you need food, if you need this, you need that, you need your prescription picked up. Doesn't matter. If you ask us, we'll make it happen, because we are a service industry. We're here to serve you. We're here to serve the client. It's not all about the gear. The studio is only as good as its staff. You could have the best stuff on the planet. That doesn't mean anything unless you have a proper environment and a proper staff that can ensure that everybody's happy throughout the, duration of a project.
It seems you and Ardent have a performance-first philosophy. How do you wish modern workflows would change, where it seems everyone wants to fix it in post or fix it later?
That is an interesting point to raise because, as I've said over and over again, there is something that has been lost. We have lost the fact that people had to come up their traditional ways. And I'm not saying that everybody should have to come up their traditional ways of a studio. But what I'm trying to say is that they didn't have to learn how to make a record or learn how to go get coffee or learn how to do this or do that. I mean, you don't have to learn how to get coffee. But what I'm saying is that they didn't have to learn the basics of how a studio operates. You know, they didn't learn from somebody that had been making records for a long time of this is how you cut a vocal, or this is how you get this, or this is how you cut a guitar, or this is how you cut a drum set. You know, they YouTube it. And there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, there's a lot of great guys that have figured it out and become amazing, but they've lost the fundamentals of there used to be limitations on what you could do. And I think that with the unlimited track count that people have, is that people have lost the art of making a decision. You know, they don't want to make a decision. They want to just keep building stuff and building stuff and building stuff. And they never quite get to the end result because they're never happy, because there's always a, well, but we can change this later, or we can fix this, or we can do that. It's like, yeah, but the records that a lot of those people like, that they listen to and look up to, they weren't done that way. And I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with moving stuff around, shifting stuff, playing with it. That's great. But there has to be a point where you get to the end and, you know, you have to know how to do it the right way. And you know, there seems to be this, I mean, you see this too. There's plugins like every day coming out, like make your vocals sound great if you use this. So then it makes people think like, well, to make my vocals sound great, I have to use that. And that's not really true. If you cut a vocal the right way, or if you cut a guitar, it doesn't matter what instrument, if you cut it the right way, you don't have to use all that stuff. But sometimes you're given tracks that need a bit of work. And in a previous day and age, that was really hard to deal with. And a lot of those tools that are out now, as far as plugins go, they make your job a lot easier because you can get a far better result out of a performance that, you know, they were probably just doing off the fly. And you're never going to be able to repeat it. So you want to figure out, how am I going to make this sound great? And those things do help you. But in general, if you just record it the right way and record it through the right equipment and just do that, I mean, it makes your life a lot easier. I mean, one of the biggest complaints that engineers come through here, you know, that they have to say is room resonance, you know, not cutting in a proper room. You'll hear that ring or the mid-range or something like that, man. You know, thank God that we have plugins that actually get rid of room resonance, because you don't have to get rid of the body of the vocal or of the guitar or anything like that like you used to have to get rid of that annoying sound. I mean, there's just so many different facets of this, but to be fair, it should be played the right way and you should have a good song. It all starts with the song. If you don't have a good song and if you don't have a good arrangement, and I think people get weirded out with that term arrangement. They think that you're talking orchestral, and it's like, no, everything requires an arrangement. And if you arrange the song properly, your job's really easy at the end of the day because all the parts work together. A lot of artists overdo it and they put too many things in that then the mixing engineer is left to sift through, and it's like, well, what am I supposed to do with this or that? And then the artist then gets upset saying, well, but that one little part was really, really important. Okay, well then you should have put that in the notes. But at the same time, I mean, there's just a lot to go through, you know? And I think that if there were some limitations that people had to face, make people's jobs a lot easier. That's all.
In a world where plugins are coming out every day, you're still using a bunch of digital effects boxes. You have 1580s, you have RMX16s, Lexicon 480s, and a slew of other outboard digital effects. Why are you still using those today, and what do you think separates them from the plugins?
Partially because they're wrong. Like, and when I say wrong, I mean that, like, there's some clunkiness to them. You know, there's some glitches and there's some weird stuff that they didn't quite have worked out, or there was limitations for the technology for the time and the era. And there's just kind of a sound that people have gotten used to over the years that just sounds more pleasing to the ear, I would say. And there are some things that DSP just hasn't quite, I don't know, in some ways it's almost too perfect. It's like, yeah, but I want it to sound a little off because the box sounds a little off. And it's also what you do to actually make some of those processors work in the mix, putting filters on, muting them, doing this, doing that. I mean, a lot of people forget that the cumulative noise that is sitting in the background of a mix actually creates an air in the mix. And I know that might sound awkward, but it's there. And when you don't have that, it's almost like it's too sterile. It's like, you want a little bit of noise in there because it's not perfect. There's nothing wrong with a little bit of that here and there. Mic pre's make noise, guitars make noise, everything makes noise. And you want to kind of blend that in a little bit. I think with some of the plugins that try to emulate that, it almost sounds too mechanical. And that's not saying that there aren't some great digital plugins, for reverbs and delays and everything. There are. But I also feel that some of them are kind of like, they take a little too far. I mean, if you think about it, what delay do you use in Avid most? Mod delay is mine, and that's been around forever. It still does it the best way. It's still the closest to a PCM42, sound-wise. I mean, I'm not saying it's exactly a 42, but I'm saying it's something that people have gotten used to. There are great reverbs too that are out now, but some of them also sound a little too almost artificial in the respect that they're almost too tinny or just too brittle. It's like the older digital units, that are hardware, they had 10-bit and 12-bit converters. They were using compansion. They were doing all this weird stuff to make it work. And that grittiness kind of makes it sound kind of cool. And the density of the reverb, that's also part of it. And that's done with hardware. That hardware does that sound. An 1176 hardware piece versus an 1176 plugin, put them side by side, they do the same effect, as I call it. But when you physically run signal through both of them, one does something and one doesn't do something. It changes from day to day too. We keep all of that, digital hardware around from that era because people like it. There's certain things that they still haven't made that can do some of it. So just stick with that.
You have Equi Tech balanced power throughout the studio, and your consoles are speccing below the factory noise floor spec. How are you deciding what noise you want in a mix, you don't want in a mix? You were talking about in the 1580, you want the noise that it's adding.
Yeah, I mean, that's pretty much a add by taste, It's kind of like making a recipe. I mean, a mix is a recipe, you got to start with the base, then you got to add some ingredients. Might need a little more salt, whatever, just putting it together. You might want to finish it off with cheese or something, who knows? But the song's going to dictate what noise and what's going to be left in the mix or what's going to happen. To give an answer to that's not fair to the song. It's like leaving the song out of the decision. So, I mean, we just try to keep an ultimately low noise floor so that when you're trying to use a lot of vintage effects or using anything like that, is that you're not fighting the desk as a factor in the noise. It might just be a piece of outboard gear. And those noise specs on the outboard gear are just inherent to their design. You can't just make them go away. Those converters do what they do. The amplifiers do what they're gonna do. You can't change that, so you just live with it.
How do you describe the difference between using vintage equipment and using new boutique hardware?
That's always an interesting one because a lot of the boutique equipment, some of its designs comes from units that we used to have to heavily modify, like an original gate stay level or SC39s. All those units were meant for program material. They weren't meant for individual instruments. They also didn't really have all the controls on them. So a lot of the guys have taken those building blocks of those circuits and said, all right, well, this part's really cool. Then how do we make it work like this and this? And they just kind of add all the extra features in, which makes it way more usable. Plus, you can also get the parts. With that said, a lot of it is way more reliable and consistent from day to day as far as a lot of the newer boutique stuff. I have to admit that. But as a studio like ours, we have to stock a lot of certain pieces that people have just grown to love, and you're not going to get them to change. If I'm around just poking my head and I'll ask one of the engineers, I'll say, did they try one of these or did you try one of that? Because I'm always getting people to try things, because I think people have such a polarized view of saying, you only can use this, and because it costs this much, it has to be great. And that's not the case. Just because there's faded paint and it has an inability to pass a square wave doesn't mean anything. It's like, oh, that makes it vintage sounding. That's great. That's what we want to use. It doesn't make it that way. I mean, I don't think the original designers were even thinking of it that way. But being able to have people try out new units is awesome, because then they hear it, and when you have an original one right next to it and say, listen, here, see? And the argument that I make with them is, what did one of these sound like brand new? And it's like, we don't know. I don't think anybody can remember what that sounded like brand new, because it's not just recapping, which has to be done on a lot of units. It's not that. You have to factor in the aging process of components like transformers. The composition of metal changes over time. It moves. Might not be as much magnetism in the transformer. There might not be this, or might not be that. This might be losing this, this might be losing that. I mean, that's all gonna factor into that sound. And I think that some people give newer equipment an unfair shake. And vintage equipment, when people are A/Bing it, they have a weird benchmark for it all. They're like, well, this sounds like this, but this mic pre sounds like this, but the newer one doesn't sound like this. And it's like, well, yeah, because there's some slightly different components and slightly different tolerances. So how are you gonna really gauge that? And no two pieces of vintage equipment sound the same. So when people are trying to A/B and give comparisons, I think that's a really unfair handshake. Most modern boutique stuff, from unit to unit is very consistent. And I think that that's awesome, because for us as a studio, then you're not worried about, well, they were using this in A and they're gonna move to C, so we have to move that over. But the client that's coming in A wants to use that too. It makes it so it's an even, level playing field between room to room to room. I like all the vintage stuff, but I also like a lot of the new boutique stuff. And also the vintage stuff is not really, it's getting to the point with the prices where it's like, it's a collector's item and people want to put it in a showcase. It's not really a tool anymore. I mean, are you going to take your set of snap-ons that comes from 1965 and they're worth more money now, so are you going to want to work on your car with those? No, you're not. You're going to want to put those away and save those and make it for a rainy day fund. And these are tools and they get used every day. And when things become so exorbitantly expensive, you don't want to use them as tools anymore. And I don't think anybody should have a fear factor in using what's in the room.
What are some of your favorite modern pieces of hardware?
Obviously, it's not even modern or modern now. I mean, it's been out for a long time, but I love the Manley Very-Mu. I think that's a great piece. It delivers what it's supposed to do, and that's great. I mean, I don't think you should always be copying old things. I also really, really like the new pool techs that Steve Jackson came out with. Those are awesome, man. And I've worked with so many pool techs in my life that I can't remember, and no two sounded the same. But those all sound the same, and they're great. And like all the new Avalon design mic pre's. The SSL Bus Plus is a great piece too. It allows people to go between the varying versions of SSL limiters that are on the mix bus. It gives them the options of saying, well, I want to try this, I want to try that, I want to try this. It gives you all the options right then and there. I love the purple Audio M677. I think that's a great unit. It's the closest to a vintage 1176 there is. I think that it's the best recreation. I mean, I could go on and on about outboard gear and the new stuff, but the point that I want to make is the microphones. I really, really, really have embraced the new microphones that have come out by boutique manufacturers, because if people think that they're buying an original vintage 47, you're lying to yourself, because that capsule's had to have been replaced by now. There have been some component failures over time. There's a lot of things. Age comes into factor. And the newer boutique manufactured mics, the capsule designs are amazing. They just sound great. And, it gives you the opportunity to have a lot more U47s and a lot more 251s in a room than you could have previously, and not worry about dropping one. Look at a vintage 47 now, it's like, 22 to 30 grand, and it's like, great, so you have this many of them. But then two sound alike. Where now, when you buy the boutique mics, tolerances are so much closer that you can use them from room to room. You're not really worried about like, did you use mic number 5 last night? Because we need that in Studio B or whatever. You can just pick one up off the shelf and they all sound pretty similar. So, I mean, manufacturers like Heiserman, the other mic manufacturer that we like a lot is Sanken, and they're not new, but they sound great. Everything that we've chosen from a boutique manufacturer, we've A/B'd against originals and everything, and they usually exceed the original. And I will even go as far as saying that we've gotten new microphones from Neumann. And I know what our 67 sounded like. And they were recapsuled and everything else. And people that say that, oh, there's this warm sound or this or that, it's like, no, that's the capsule just losing top end. People have come in that have heard the new 67s that we have, and they pretty much freaked and said, this is like the best sounding 67 ever. And Neumann just shipped us brand new ones. And when I had somebody in one day that was a naysayer, said, oh, there's no way that a new 67 could sound good or anything, I got a little clever. So I went and took the body of an 87 that was beat up, put it on a 67, took a grill that was off of one and swapped it all so it looked like it was old. Put it on there and he's like, yep, I told you those vintage 67s sound really great. And I waited till after the session. I said, opened the mic up and I said, that one was new. And he did not know what to say. And he was just like, oh, don't listen with your eyes, listen with your ears. My favorite piece of boutique gear, I have one, but it's the UA 175. That unit just does it for me. Everything that we've gotten from you guys, as boutique mics and everything go, they're all awesome. Oh, like the new Town mics.
The Loudons, yeah.
And those Loudon mics are awesome. And they get rid of so much cymbal bleed. Plus, unlike mics that you would use in the past to do that job, you don't have to like suck all the 600 to 800 out of them. They just sound good on their own. I mean, all that stuff's cool. That design of that Loudon, when you think about it, that almost harkens back to when the Grateful Dead was doing the Wall of Sound. Because they were using an opposing capsule to cancel noise to eliminate feedback. This is a very similar philosophy. So I think that those mics are amazing. I mean, just so many people make so much great stuff now that it's just amazing. But with that said, there are also a lot of people that are trying to capitalize on that, making things that appear to be something that aren't. And that's where you have to be wary.
Tell me about the compacts you have in your rack.
Ah, yes, the Compex. The very misunderstood piece of equipment. John Fry actually also liked Compexes. And he used to run them at low ratios, but higher threshold. And I've used Compexes for a very long time. But that is probably one of my favorite pieces of gear of all times. And if you look at some of your very prestigious mixers and guys that have worked on records, I think that Jack Joseph is one of them. He has a pretty hefty rack of those as well. That unit makes some magic happen. Yeah. The expander is a feature that if you learn it well enough, you can take snare drums and take the grace notes and bring them up. Compressor on it's just amazing. I mean, that unit's design and what it's really known for is the limiter function in it. And the limiter function on that was originally used on When the Levee Breaks, which would have been an ADR F600, which is just the limiter section of that unit. That thing puts a pummeling, and it does it really, really well. But it works great on vocals, it works great on everything. It's just one of those units, it's like a secret handshake club. It's like, oh, you know about that, he'd come in. It's like, to me, that's always kind of been the Swiss Army compressor. So you can make a whole record with one of those. And actually, there have been many records made with just those because they were OEM'd to Helios. So Helios put those in some of their desks. Clapton's had them, I think the Stones desk had them, and those were the limiters that they had. So they were used quite extensively. I will say this, the old ones always had some component problems as far as the pots and the rotary switches. But, that one, all the new ones that we have, I have never had a problem with them, and they're great. And they actually do tell you how to wire them, because that was also a mystery on some of those, like, is this one a balanced one, or is this one unbalanced? It's like, well, if there was a TX and then there was a transformer, so it was balanced, but never knew if yours was a pin 2 or a pin 3 hot. So there was always a guessing game that went on there. Just when you found it was right, you just left it that way and you didn't touch it ever again. But yeah, man, I love that. That's probably one of my favorite units we have here.